So MOAD's physical building may be closed due to the mandatory shelter in place, but you can still get your fill of art and artists of the African diaspora. Each Wednesday at 1 p.m., join MOAD staff members as we visit some of our favorite artists in their studios to see what they're currently working on and how their work is changing as a result of the quarantine. This is a rare opportunity to hear from artists directly from their studios. We will follow all talks with an audience Q&A, so please feel free to leave your questions in either the chat box or the Q&A box, and please visit our website to see which artists we have coming up. You can also go back and watch all of our past talks on the MOAD YouTube channel. This series was made possible by generous donations from the Westridge Foundation, our wonderful MOAD members and viewers like you. Thank you all for your continued support. We couldn't put on any of this programming without all of you. MOAD stands in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. We honor and mourn the senseless murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, Tony McDade, and so many others who have lost their lives at the hands of police brutality and racial injustice, including those whose names we do not know. We would also like to give a brief land acknowledgement. Most of us are settler, immigrants, or descendants of those forcefully brought to this continent. Our institutions were founded upon exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples whose lands we are located. With deep respect, MOAD acknowledges that even in virtual space, our people, our work, and our network servers are on native lands, and we thank the indigenous people of the Bay Area who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. Lastly, if you've been enjoying this series or any MOAD programming, please consider donating to MOAD online. Donations of any amount are always welcome, and the link to where you can donate will be found in the chat. And so without further ado, I'd like to introduce us to today's featured artist, Erica Deeman. Erica is a visual artist living and working in San Francisco, California. Originally from the UK, she's lived in the States for 9 years. Deeman's work explores portraiture and its traditions through the intersections of gender, race, and transnational identities. Her work has been exhibited nationally and internationally at Aberystwyth Arts Centre, Aberystwyth, UK, Pier 24 Photography, San Francisco, Berkeley Art Museum, Berkeley, California, and New Orleans Art Museum, New Orleans, Louisiana, to name a few. Permanent collections include Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, Museum of Contemporary Photography, Columbia College of Chicago, Museum of Photographic Arts, San Diego, New Orleans Museum of Art, Pérez Art Museum Miami, and Pier 24 Photography in San Francisco. Deeman is represented by Anthony Meier Fine Arts in San Francisco, who is also graciously co-presenting this event with us today. So welcome, Erica. It's so great to get to talk to you.
Oh
yeah,
gosh,
of course.
It's so great.
How are you feeling?
I'm feeling.
I mean, again, loaded question, always.
You know, I think I feel always thankful that during this period of time, I have had what feels like a safe space to be, and the ability to kind of keep moving forward in my practice and to keep making. But I mean, there's so many emotions that we have all felt during this time. It's difficult. It's difficult to pinpoint one, and it's also even more difficult to actually sit in one for any duration of time, because I think we have been bombarded, and it's kind of like moving through all of these different emotions. And in this moment in time, I'm joyful to have been asked for this conversation and to be sitting here with you. So yeah,
holding joy is really important right now. I think it's really rare, but the moments that come are always really nice.
Yeah, and I think as well, like finding joy in the small things, like things that I may have, overlooked when life was in its different momentum. And I think that finding joy in like riding my bike is even just having a bike is something that that I never would have even thought about. Feeling the wind through my hair, just those small things, a constant reminder of what we actually really need in our lives, and kind of removing consumption and capitalism kind of from that has been very enjoyable. But I mean, we are always offset with with the sheer amount of loss that we have had as a Black community
Right.
during this time. So it's, you know, it's kind of flowing and ranging in all these different feelings. How are you? I mean, how are things with you? I mean, I want to return the question.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. It's touch and go a lot of the time, which is just what it is right now, I suppose. I guess I want to reflect on the few things that have been bringing me joy, I think, recently. I think, you know, you mentioning going for bike rides. I don't have a bike, but I have been going on very long walks, usually around Lake Merritt, which is being by water has been really helpful for maintaining sanity. I recently got roller skates, and so I've
Oh, yes.
been trying that out to, you know, varied success. So yeah, just like I think being present, trying to be more present in my body has been really useful, especially as we're all so disconnected via screens. Has been really nice. And yeah, just kind of sitting with that. I'm really excited about, you know, it's been unfortunately a very long time since I've seen you in person. So this is really exciting to be able to talk to you even in virtual space, and kind of find out what you've been working on these last few months, and really like start to dig into your work a little bit. So I like to start out these studio visits first by kind of grounding us in the space and feeling like we really are in your studio. So I don't know if you would be interested in either telling us a little bit about your workspace or showing us around a little bit, give us a little exclusive sneak peek.
Oh yeah, for
The
sure.
space of Erica.
Let me kind of move a little bit this way. It's interesting for me to have found these various spaces within my house that I never really utilized. And so kind of like dead areas, like so-called dead areas have actually kind of become places where I've thrived and I've made. So here is here is my little kind of studio. And you've been to my home before,
Yeah.
and you can hopefully you might remember this bookcase,
Mm-hmm.
but there was really nothing there. And so I kind of used the shelf and created like an editing space, and kind of like I have some books here that kind of keep me going. And so because I'm also here with my wife Janelle, she has kind of really kind of worked more in this space here. And so this is like a spare bedroom that we have. And so you can see some kind of smatterings of different things that I've been working on. And we'll come back to this box here. And then kind of through the kitchen, I'm getting a total tour of my house.
I love it. A total house tour. Most people are so shy.
So this is where I've been kind of creating my new pieces. So this is a 3D printer that I borrowed from a friend at Adobe, and he kind of lent it to me around a year ago. So kind of during my residency when I was up at the Headlands, which you also came to visit me at. So
I did.
I think you might have seen this working. And so there's kind of various pieces that I've been making in this area. And again, like this part of my house is really kind of almost like I would say a dumping ground of storage. And so it's kind of, this time has really motivated me to kind of use the space that I have, like without having access to my own studio there. And so it's kind of actually now coming kind of through this, it's like made me question the role of my actual studio. And I think that you know, having this safe space, having the space in my house, it's like I've actually found comfort in being able to make here. And, you know, recently I've been going back to the studio to kind of fire some pieces I needed to repaint. The studio, I was making an installation there prior to the lockdown. And so I painted the space black, and kind of coming back into the space and seeing this installation that I'd had to hold, you know, I needed to kind of do some retrofitting to kind of keep moving forward. And even being in there, it's so interesting, the energy of that space compared to kind of sitting in this energy here and having a companion as well, and kind of thinking about being alone versus having a companion.
Do you find, I know we've often with your work, talked a lot about, I think one of the last times I saw you, you were reading Elizabeth Alexander's Interiors, and we were talking about interiority. Do you find that working in your home now, having your studio in your home, well, your studio is your studio, but having the studio practice now within your own home is really affected the way you think about your own interiority and the interiority of kind of the subjects that you work with?
Definitely. I think that, you know, the practice of making portraiture, you're kind of creating a space, and there is this interiority, this, you know, even if it's kind of staged in a way, there is this kind of creation and kind of finding and making work with another person. You're creating this safe space. And so thinking about working in my own home and this being the safe space, especially during COVID, it actually being the safe space, has kind of been transformational. And I don't know if I can truly answer it. I don't think I've digested enough, but it's certainly given me comfort, and in many ways returned me to myself, because of the collaborations that have had to kind of been put on hold. It's kind of directed me back to myself, and to all the resources that I thankfully and gratefully have here.
Yeah, I think that was definitely something I was wondering about your work in particular, because so much of your work is around portraiture, and what does that look like when you can't have, you know, these intimate moments with your sitters in the same way. Have you found ways of, I guess, what has your process looked like in this time? Have you shifted away from portraiture in this time, or are you finding new ways to utilize this distance to still create that kind of work?
You know, I think of like two things when in that question. I think that, you know, there has been a definite shift in my practice. You know, it has just not been physically safe to be in commune and in collaboration with anybody else. And so it's kind of made me reevaluate and go back into my archive. And so as a photographer, the way that I work, I love the creating, I love the making, and the editing, if I'm completely honest, is probably my weakest point, is actually reviewing and kind of making these decisions. And so in many ways, it's kind of pushed me to look at images that I might have not looked at, or work that wasn't kind of moving towards a project, and some of the images that I've made just for sheer love in collaboration with friends, and just maybe going over to somebody's house. I've actually had time to look at that work, which has been really exciting. And I've forgotten how much work I've actually made and not really looked at. And the second thing is actually realizing this process I've been going on through the last 2 years, which has been focusing on myself and the work that I make. And as we all make as collaborators, you're searching for new paths, but you're also searching for yourself in many ways. And as I collaborate with people, and as I was a new immigrant here, I was definitely looking to find myself and find a safe space and community with all of the people that I've made work with. And so kind of turning the camera onto myself, it's a different time to actually see who I've really become, or who I perceive I've become, or who I am in this particular space that I've created to make this photograph. So, you know, much of the work I was looking at was work that I made a year ago of myself in the headlands, in this kind of quiet space of almost isolation, almost like mirroring in many ways where I am right now, but also making new work and kind of finding, I'm a light junkie, and like finding places of light in my house where I feel that I can make photographs that really kind of talk to the position that I'm in right now.
Can you I don't know. It sounds like all of this is kind of a process that's still in the germination stage, which is very exciting. But can you show us any images that you've been working on in the last few months that kind of reflect this internal kind of look and the turning the camera back on yourself?
Absolutely. Let's kind of go into this room here.
I love it. Little field trips.
Yes, it's like this little, hopefully no one's getting motion sick on this. But let me kind of draw into some kind of works that I was making. And so I began making some self-portraits, and then I was actually asked by the New York Times to make some work for a piece called Sources of Self-Regard, which was accompanied by an essay by Deborah Willis, which it was wonderful to kind of have her words kind of sit with images that we've been creating, and some wonderful works from people like Dana Scruggs. And so this is some work that I've been making. Let me get one more out for you. So let's have a look at these here. And so because my practice is really kind of based in film, and for me, again, it's this ownership of process, and I enjoy the technical accuracy that film demands. And so being in the quarantine and being unable to kind of process film and to kind of drop off and pick up, I wanted to kind of stay true to that practice. And so I began working in the Instax, and it's so interesting to think about how much I enjoy the time in between the making of the photographs and receiving the process and then receiving them back, versus kind of still using film but having this immediacy. And so it's many questions that I've been asking myself, you know, about this whole process. And so these photographs are kind of made on the edge of this bed just here. And in the morning, the house is west facing. So in the morning, the light kind of billows in. And there's enough light here for the Instax camera to not want to use the flash. And so I can actually kind of create these images just purely with the sunlight. And so it really is, it depends on the day. I mean, living in San Francisco, we are not always guaranteed a sunny morning.
Right.
But also this kind of time and decision that I'm ready to be seen. And in many ways, having this box here and being able to archive the pieces, it's almost like it's my hard drive. It's like my scan. I've scanned the negative, and I can just put them away and know that they're in a safe space, but not have to look at them until I'm really ready to look at them.
Do you have a, I mean, some of these appeared, as you said, in New York Times, but do you have a destination for them for the future, or are these more personal items for you and for thinking about where your practice is going, you know, the next phase of your practice?
You know, I think that it's a good question. I think because they've been in the New York Times, they, you know, certainly the images that appeared almost no longer belong to me. But I think that it will be a timely reminder for me and for all of us that eventually, if I do find a place to share them, that of this moment in time. So, I mean, I was asked to share the work, and I politely declined. But I think that, you know, in the future, I think it will. I would love to actually share them. I think one of the things I have to think about is how that happens, and whether that is as in a grid format, or whether it's kind of more in an individual style. So You know, and it's an ongoing process as well.
Yeah.
I think I have about 40 of them. And so it's nice to kind of review them, but also kind of put them away and not have to look at them, and kind of seeing them as this moment in time, like the literal moment in time.
Yeah, what are these going to look like, and what are these going to mean to you a year from now, you know, in the same way that you were kind of thinking about in making these, where you were in the headlands a year ago. In this time, 2021, it'll be interesting to pull these back out, I guess, and to see what has changed, or stayed the same.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the sanctuary of one's home, you know, even as I say the sanctuary of one's home, you know, I think about Breonna Taylor, who didn't have sanctuary in her own home, and kind of sitting on the edge of the bed, kind of having this desire to be seen, and to kind of share who I am. You know, it's all of these questions, you know, will be amplified. There will be even more questions, I am sure, as we kind of continue to move through what we're kind of traveling through right now. I think, you know, having this camera in your hand, and, you know, when making the Instax images, you know, it literally is an arm's length. There is no other support. You know, that also kind of adds many questions, you know, thinking about my process as being very kind of controlled in many ways, in terms of, you know, the camera, the lighting, kind of being out of control in this making process is exciting, and also kind of has made me ask lots of other questions about how I want to see my practice moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think looking at those, I think, is a good segue into looking at some of your previous bodies of work. I definitely want to spend some time talking about silhouettes, I think. Yes. I think that's obviously there's a direct relationship, I think, between these Instax photos of yourself, especially because of how, even though your wonderful mane of hair obscures like some of your face in some of them, there's also a forward facingness to these works in a way that we are denied to a certain extent with silhouette. So I'm just going to share my screen really quickly so that people can see these. Oh. Hold on 1 second. What is happening? Let's see if that works. Oh no. Okay. Well, I'll come back to this in a second. It's not, for whatever reason, it's not allowing me to share my screen.
Trust technology. It's always the way.
I know,
this
whole Zoom situation, it's quite strange, quite stressful.
You're doing great.
Thank you.
It's like 12:55. Everything was fine. It all worked.
Exactly. Here we go. Apologies, everyone.
Oh, good. This is great.
All right. Can you see this?
Yes, this is
excellent.
Great.
Okay, so yes. So silhouettes. So this was the first body of work of yours that I'd seen. I originally saw it at Pier 24, installed in situ with that really like dramatic Embarcadero light that comes through that, you know, that one weird like room in Pier 24. So just to kind of kick things off, would you mind just talking a little bit about how this series originated, what the impetus for it was, and how you began thinking through it?
Totally. I mean, I think, with silhouette, so much of it began as actually just making and kind of creating images, and then really kind of going back and thinking about this moment in time that I was in, and kind of the desires that I had as someone who was, relatively new to the country. I began making this project in 2013, and I was still in school, and it kind of began as a single image. And I had met a girl called Fatou in a bar in Little Baobab in the Mission, and she was the server there. And when I saw her, I was immediately drawn to her, and I asked if she would sit for a portrait. And I think when you ask someone to sit for a portrait, there's so many questions that kind of come to the surface, and how portraiture is seen, and this invitation into the studio in many ways became, it kind of feels a lot grander than the intimacy that we ultimately create in the space. And so she came to sit for me, and we kind of began making some images, and very standard kind of portraiture images. And then we took a break. And for me, in my practice, I think one of the reasons I love film is that it makes me see. And the idea of just kind of this repetition of pressing the button is different with film, because you don't have that you don't have the infinity of the medium. You only have a set amount of images you can create. And so with Fatou, we took a break, and when we returned to the portrait, I hadn't turned the key light back on, and so I was presented with this lit backdrop and her silhouette kind of in my viewfinder, and that was the image that I made. And I sat with that image. The image in my critiques at school, it received great critique, and it just sat with me for a long time. And I kind of intuitively decided I wanted to make more of those images. And so I just went about kind of finding Black women, and my network was incredibly small at the time. And so I would actually kind of wait on the street and kind of look for Black women and kind of approach them and share my work and ask if they would want to come to the studio to kind of create a portrait that was very similar in style. So that's kind of how it all began. And when I reflect back, I think about my desire for community, and this different type of community. Coming from the UK, my Black community was my family. And, I went to this all-girls school, and maybe 5 or 6 people in the whole of my school were Black. And so there was this definite desire to kind of build community and find myself in this Black space. And so the project, I look back and it's so clear that I was really trying to commune with Black women, and also kind of think about being seen as a Black woman, and all of the nuances that we have that may not necessarily present themselves. And kind of if these kind of images have the contrast of kind of color, or are perceived as black and white, then thinking about this light and thinking about what resides in the shadow, and the kind of wonder and expansiveness of kind of seeing that develop, kind of is almost like this metaphor for me and for my being here in many ways.
I mean, that's truly the idea of communing with all of these different women, and finding community within not only the women you were seeing in your everyday interactions, but then really being forced to stop and see them differently behind the camera, I think is really powerful, in that photography has had this very long history in terms of, it's grown up and grown out of, in many ways, this kind of scientific and often scientific and voyeuristic depictions of specifically of the Black image and of Black women, and how Black women are imaged and are pictured historically. And I think there's something very both subtle but also challenging in the work that you're doing. You know, there is also a history in terms of Black female image makers, in terms of refusing the gaze, thinking of like Lorna Simpson, for instance. But with these works, they're not completely, they don't have their backs to us. They're in profile in this kind of almost like cameo, Victorian cameo-esque sort of way, which I feel like also it allows the viewer to gaze upon them, but they're entirely self-possessed, which is not always, which just feels like a very powerful way of reinterpreting the camera's relationship to the Black sitter. And so I was just wondering if you know, obviously you as a Black photographer, and coming out of, you know, also out of schooling and all of these, you know, different histories of photography, if that history and that challenging history was something that came up for you as well as you were making these works.
Absolutely. I mean, I think as a Black person, kind of in the medium of photography, you are always aware of the othering of yourself and of your community. And so, you know, I think about myself, I think of coming here and really feeling this pure intensity of being othered in a way that I had never truly felt back in the UK. I mean, I will tell you, it is 100% there, but the violence and the intensity is completely different. And so, you know, I spent time kind of thinking about that, thinking of what the portrait really meant and what it was meant to really share and show of a person. And then also kind of going back into the archive and thinking about, you know, these negative depictions. But again, there is always this tension between this like negative and positive. You know, if negative depictions have been created in black and white photography, then these images are color. And so in many ways, there is this contemporary, it automatically becomes contemporary because of the color of these images. And, you know, and not to forget that the images are, you know, 45 inches by 45 inches. So if there is this notion of the silhouette as this small, intimate creation, then these photographs kind of remove all of that notion. And so definitely, you know, kind of thinking about these negative depictions and, you know, how in many ways we still live with them today, definitely kind of inform the work. And yet I see within it both Western and kind of Afro gazes. If I think about Western art, I can see it within this work, but I also see, you know, Afro legacy within this work as well. And so I think that kind of putting all of those tensions into one pot, I think that the work, you know, I really enjoy the expansiveness of the work and how the different layers of entry are kind of present there. And, you know, even thinking about how I titled the whole series, you know, I untitled the series. And, you know, that came from a place of protection, you know, in many ways. Why should people know necessarily the name of these people? You know, it may not necessarily always be a desirable or safe space, you know. And even thinking about institutions, you know, institutions were not created with us in mind. And so there was this like level of protection that I had for all of the women in the work as well, thinking about that.
I'm gonna stop sharing my screen really quickly because I want to segue into, wait, let's see, did that work? Here we go. I want to segue into another series of yours based on something that you just said in terms of thinking about your coming to the States and your experience of kind of the intensity of that, the violence of the gaze in a specific way comparative to your upbringing in the UK. I really want to spend a little bit of time talking about the 1619 project that you worked on with the New York Times, and your being involved in that project. First, I guess my first question kind of is, how did you become involved in the how did you become involved in the project, and then what was the experience like for you to visit, and I'll show some of the works, but to visit with these objects and to be kind of the carer for them, in the sense of how you were going to photograph them and present them in the project.
Sure. With projects like the 1619 project, the question I have is like, how did they find me? And it's so interesting because the reach out was a very kind of simple yet beautifully crafted email from Jessica Dimpson at the Times. And it was a very it was an email that didn't really kind of go into huge detail about what the project was, but kind of the key points, and it was very understated. And what was particularly interesting to me was that this was a still life project, and of course I like to think that I'm known for my portraits, and so we had this wonderful conversation about what made me the right fit for the work. And that really kind of came down to the use of light and how, light has this ability to tell a story. And I think with Silhouettes and the Brown series, I kind of used it to discuss the power of each person within the image and within the setting that I've created. And so, Jessica was like keen. I was like, I hope that I make portraits. And she was like, it's really important that we set the right tone for these images. And so I accepted the project. I honestly didn't think with my schedule I was going to be able to kind of do the project, but I kind of moved some things around, and some things kind of happened in my life that kind of made it possible for me to create this project. And it was almost like this silver lining to a cloud. And we had long discussions, Elena, about how to light these objects. And for me, because they carry the weight of such a disgusting history, that they could not be beautiful, that these objects had to have a weight to them. And so the shadow became this metaphor for the weight of history. And so they sent me a list of items, and immediately looking at this list, I was concerned that there was no sense of what's the word I'm looking for? Defiance. There was nothing there that suggested that, if I'm looking at a document of sale, or if I'm looking at a daguerreotype, there was nothing to say that our enslaved ancestors were still using the crafts that they had learned in their homeland. And so this particular image here, the basket, they added that in. We had this whole conversation about it, and they added this image in because it really kind of highlighted the craft that our enslaved ancestors were kind of bringing over. And this is like a rice basket. And so it was nice to have that voice and that input into adding objects and items in to kind of tell a fuller narrative of the journey and of the beginnings of slavery in this country. And so when we got to actually being in Washington, DC, the space, we were just in this kind of big hangar, which was air conditioned. It had no real identity to it. It was on the outskirts of DC. We were nowhere near the museum. It was a very cool experience, and yet there were certain restrictions that we had on each object. Of course, there was no way that we could touch anything. Right. We only had a certain amount of time with each object because of the sensitivity to light. And so it meant that we were working in a very fast way. And a lot of the images were created with staged objects prior, and then the object would be brought in by preparators and kind of staged where we wanted it. So in many ways, the amount of time that we had with each object was limited, but still completely profound. And the group of people that worked on the project, all of us were women and 3 of us were Black women. And so, you know, I managed to fly in my assistant from New Orleans. Jazz came, and, you know, it was this wonderful experience. And we both stood there looking at these objects in wonder of how far we've actually come. And, you know, kind of harking back to photography in its early beginnings and its scientific nature and this negativity, to kind of be mastering this medium in front of these objects was almost, it almost felt like standing on the edge of the universe, how far we had come.
Yeah. Did you feel, so just to give a little additional context for those who, you know, 1619 being sort of a year to chart the beginnings, or the beginnings of America as a nation, ultimately through looking at the transatlantic slave trade, and specifically looking, you know, this project, your portion of the project, looking at these objects is kind of telling some of that story. Did you find, and I want to say specifically in terms of thinking about your conversations with Jazz or thinking about the other women on the project and your upbringing coming from the UK, what was that like, I suppose, in terms of like seeing this, you know, obviously we're hosted by the Museum of the African Diaspora. There's obviously, we're very invested in having these, in thinking about the nuances and the complexities of what the origin of this particularly violent and world-altering movement of people. What was it like, I guess, being in commune, again, to use you know, one of your, with these objects as well as with these other women whose diasporic stories were both similar and different from your own? And did you find in sort of in being involved in this project, did you find many similarities or disparities in how you understood this history from your position coming from the UK versus kind of an American understanding of this history?
I think that, you know, what history is always so problematic because it is always told by the victors. You know, if you know, we in the UK, you know, are not taught the history of slavery at any point in time. And certainly in my education, you know, history was very much focused on, you know, the Napoleonic Wars, you know, these great championing moments of British history. I mean, the empire is completely skipped over. And then we kind of move to maybe the abolition, we touch upon that, and then through to like women's suffragette movements. And so, you know, kind of grounding yourself in this history and thinking about these diasporic movements is completely different. I think of, you know, I think of my grandparents moving from Jamaica to the United Kingdom and the trauma and the this kind of casual racism that they felt in kind of moving to the UK. I mean, as well as some violent moments. It's there is this disconnection of the story in many ways until you come back to this country and you realize that there is this one main journey that the majority, all of our ancestors have taken, and, you know, the Middle Passage and the violence of that. And I think that, you know, for me as an individual, it kind of living here has been so wondrous, but also so traumatic as well, that kind of standing in front of these objects you know, I truly understood the trauma. And maybe it's something that I hadn't always kind of sat with because of this completely different experience. And I think about the Black experience outside of this country as being completely different. And so it brought so many things together, and this feeling of oneness as well as we stood there. You know, this true oneness of experience. I think that it was very emotional to kind of be with these objects. I mean, these kind of papers of sale, you understand, you know, the pure evil, and, you know, thinking about paper as this evil object, you know, that so much was written, the transaction of money is kind of all is there for all to see. But then also reminding yourself of this struggle, and that we are still here and we will always be here, and that the journey has been long, but we made it to this point, and just feeling very grateful for that. Does that answer your question? I feel like
yeah, no, this was a very meditative, there was no trick question, no right answer, just genuinely very interested in what that experience, because as you see, you know, these objects are so precious and so rare. Most of us will not be as lucky as to get any time with them. So just interested in what your experience was like.
I mean, I think as well, like, even when you think about what is kept, what is archived, you know, a lot of these items, you know, there were some beautiful photographs, again, kind of made, you know, under the constraint and restriction and violence of slavery. And you can kind of see this beauty, but understand, you know, the violence as well. But it also kind of brought up the questions of what is so valuable to keep. You know, many of these items, you may not, you know, how does it serve as a reminder to us that are we constantly reminded of the evil of this moment in time? And it kind of, it makes me think of what the artifact is. I think about, you know, how many artifacts reside in the British museums, you know, in the Tate, and how these were stolen items which are now kind of in Western institutions, and how, you know, these items need to be returned back to the peoples that they were stolen from. And yet we have this, and yet again we have these other items that kind of sit in this place of preservation. And it kind of reminded me as well of how much has actually been lost, and what is actually, how do we choose the items that we keep?
Yeah, that's
I mean, I don't know.
No, yeah. That's a whole other hour-long talk, to be sure. So I have talked to you for a long time, and I am very aware. I mean, and I've enjoyed every moment of it, but I definitely want to. We're probably going to go over time, but I want to be able to get some of these questions from the audience in here before we end. So the first question in the Q&A is, how do you find that rest shows up within your practice?
It's a good question. I think kind of being okay with the fluidity of making and of not making, and kind of having that maybe not defined necessarily by this need of productivity. Kind of finding, what I found during this time is that it's okay for me not to make. And that and if that is resting, then that is fine. That the multiple weeks that I didn't make anything, that was time that I needed to recuperate and to center and ground myself all in one. I think that I don't think that as a Black person right now there is much time for resting. I think that's something that I have been very, very mindful to kind of carve out for myself. But I think just not making and being happy not to make is very restful. You know, I like to pet my dog. I'm surprised Max hasn't made an
I was
appearance.
wondering, yeah.
I think he's with Janelle. I think she's
Okay.
probably going on lockdown. But you know, that has also kind of provided me with an outlet to kind of rest and also to kind of meditate as well.
Mm. The next question is starts with a comment and then a question. There's such a wonderful softness to the images. Is some of this the product of the way you develop the film?
I don't think, I think no is the answer to that. There is, it may actually be the screen. I think that softness may come from the light, and I think the light definitely caresses each woman in the silhouette series, and it is almost kind of like a blanket. But the way that I made the images was at a very small aperture because because of the contrast, I wanted to capture as much information as possible. So when you see them in person, they're definitely not soft. But I think that there definitely is a love and a caress that the light kind of billowing from the background gives each figure. So yeah.
Okay, so the next question, and I want to mention that, so I also have images from Brown that I didn't get, we've been talking about, it's been great. It's been absolutely phenomenal, but we didn't get a chance to really look at those. But so the next question I think works in both the Silhouette series as well as Brown, which is, what has been the general reaction to images by the subjects? Have you learned anything interesting by their reactions to seeing themselves captured in this way?
I think some images have been met with surprise. I think that the formality of having a portrait made is a unique experience, and I think with such intent, sometimes people are very surprised by the results. I think that certainly I think of one friend in the Brown series who was very surprised to see himself looking so serene, and you know, he is full of energy, and many comments have kind of come in like, I am so surprised that you got this person in this particular light.
Just want to be able to show some of them. Yeah.
Yeah. I think, you know, something we haven't really touched, well, we kind of touched upon briefly is the scale of the works. And with the Brown series, the prints are 26 inches by 26 inches. So it's just slightly larger than life. And I think when I see people, you know, maybe it's blue, you know, maybe when I see people standing with themselves, like Marvin, he came to the show that was up at Bamford, which was called Way Bay, and his piece was displayed in that show. And it is always so exciting to kind of have this connection with the physical person, and then having this scale of the work that is also represented at the size the person could be is just really interesting and quite profound in many ways. I think, you know, it's such an act of seeing, and you know, kind of inviting with this series, you know, inviting people into your home. And you know, many of the collaborators were strangers. When we met at the doorstep, there would be one person that would have connected us, and I really kind of felt that I opened up my questions to my silhouette community and asked them to kind of send me and connect me to their network of men and those identifying as men. And so, you know, you're kind of having this unique moment of meeting someone for the first time, kind of creating this intimate portrait and also learning about people's lives, that when there is this end result, it's really interesting to get everyone's perspective on how they feel that they are seen. And so it kind of ranges from person to person, but there's definitely this uniqueness in this space. And also to kind of ask people to remove an item of clothing is kind of also this kind of vulnerability, and which I think we both share in kind of space in, and also in sharing our lives. So yeah, there's a lot to think about in each piece and kind of representing each person. I like to think that there is a lot of care that I take in kind of how I show each person, and I hope that that kind of translates through the work.
Well, that is an excellent. There's there's a couple more in the chat, but I know we are also. I'm just gonna ask these last two, I guess, really quickly, and then we'll try to wrap up. So so the second to last question is: has the time of self-isolation made you miss collaborating with others, and do you think it'll give more of an appreciation for that kind? It'll give you more of an appreciation for that kind of collaboration when we are back to normal.
Definitely. I think that I don't think that we will ever truly return back, and I would like to say I don't really know what normal is. I think normal is up for grabs, and we're here to take it. So what I really appreciate is, you know, I appreciate kind of sharing and kind of opening up myself and kind of feeling that there is this gift that I receive with every portrait that I make, this gift of understanding and of trust. And I really miss that connection. I mean, it kind of blows my mind to think that we had so much freedom before.
We took for granted.
How we just took that for granted. And so there will be something so precious that will kind of come back to us all when we can all be in each other's company. I think that with my process, there's definitely been this loosening of certain tensions and maybe control, maybe in terms of the space and the environment that I create. So maybe that is something that I will be exploring more. And as I kind of move into, you know, grad school and this kind of whole space of experimentation, I am excited to see how this time has an impact on the work that I make and the mediums that I will be choosing to use. But I'm incredibly grateful for everyone that I've collaborated with. And I think that that's something that has been reinforced during this time is like how much time people take to kind of help me and make work with me. And so, so yeah, I think it's almost quite humbling in a way to kind of think about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Last question. Though it is a doozy. So,
A doozy.
Yes. So this one is, Erica, you expressed the desire to protect your silhouette sitters by not naming them. I'm wondering if you balance that against knowing that Black women are often not seen as individuals, not named and treated as interchangeable.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, at the time, you know, I made this decision kind of prior to Me Too and kind of like say her name. But I think kind of there was also a tension with the Black female body of it as kind of truly not owning ourselves. And so there was definitely this desire to kind of keep a piece of someone's identity for themselves. And this idea that, you know, as Black women, we are always giving, we are always problem solving, we are always sharing ourselves, that within this space of sharing, that there could still remain something that belonged to them. Mm-hmm. And that became kind of very important and very driving for me. And don't get me wrong, I have like thought about this like 1,000 times, like, did I make the right decision? But I think because there is this nuance in the lighting as well, that these suggestions that I'm offering, and this kind of, this space that we have created together does not need to be necessarily named and identified, that really, you know, there should be something that Black women can kind of keep for themselves. And for me, that was their name.
Well, thank you so much for today. This has been a fantastic conversation. I feel like, even though we didn't get to really dig into Brown, I'm glad we got to look at it a little bit. Yeah. And I'm glad we got to touch on so many different projects. I guess just before we leave, the one thing that I would love, if you want to plug anything real quick before we end this call.
Yes, definitely. I will be sharing new pieces of the sculptural work kind of derived from photographs, and that work will be up at Anthony Meier Fine Arts in the city, opening on the 25th of August through to the 2nd of October. I believe that the gallery will be having an appointment based way to view the work. The work will also be online in a virtual viewing room. So I'm really excited for it. We didn't even get to see those pieces.
I know, it's too much. Well, it's not too much. It's a lot, which is always exciting. It's always exciting.
It is exciting.
We'll have to do another one.
Here we go. Then the other thing is I will be also doing a 30-minute studio visit for Art Noir. Art Noir is an Instagram platform which shares wonderful artists and works, and I'm really excited for that. And that is tomorrow, and the time is 2 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific Standard Time, PST. So that's also something to watch out for. But you know, I just want to thank you so much for having me. You know, I was in conversation earlier with another collaborator, and I was saying how nice it is to have this museum in the Bay Area, and especially as well, like in San Francisco, kind of supporting us in every way possible. And I just want to thank you for having me so much. It's such an honor.
It's such an honor to be in conversation with you. Thank you for agreeing. And thank you to everyone who attended the event today. Stay tuned for more of our programming coming up later in the week, as well as previous programming on our YouTube channel. And just keep watching out for more from Moad and more from Erica Deeman.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.